Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shirtless. This show is brought to you by Camp Constitution, which, among other things, runs a wonderful week and a day-long family camp in beautiful Ringe, New Hampshire at the Tullinippie Christian Retreat Center. This year's camp will run from July 10th to the 17th. And one of our guest instructors will be Mrs. Chris Ann Hall, and we're very pleased to add Mr. John F. McManus, author of numerous books and former publisher of the New American Magazine. And you can visit us on our website, www.campconstitution.net. This particular show is broadcast out of Aroostook County on WBCQ The Planet, shortwave every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's rebroadcast on IPMNation.org on Saturday afternoons at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and also on Facebook, usually, hopefully within a week or so after it's broadcast. And I am very delighted and honored to have as a guest today Mr. Richard Frye. And Richard, I see you there.
Yes, sir.
Well, let me read this bio sketch here. But before I do that, I'll mention that one of our adversaries in this Article 5 battle, Mr. Mike Farris, referred to you as a leaky pipe lawyer. So I think that's a badge of honor. And a few years ago, it was an article written about a presentation I gave on Article 5. It was a left-wing version of left-wing media, and I was referred to as an ammosexual. So I'm kind of never heard of that term before, but I like that. So how about a leaky pipe lawyer and an ammosexual? How's that for on a portfolio? Richard is an experienced presenter who genuinely enjoys teaching his fellow patriots about the Constitution and the often forgotten extra-constitutional principles which are essential to our liberty. Richard is a unique attorney that understands the difference between constitutional law that taught in law school and the law of the Constitution, i.e. that which the framers intended. He believes the survival of our liberty is not just dependent solely upon compliance with the Constitution, but rather on the complete package of protections afforded us under the principles of federalism and sovereignty. Whether the information is in the form of speech, briefing, testimony, educational presentation, workshop, webinar, or other medium, it is presented in a clear and easily understood, informative, and substantive format. Rich is a full-time liberty activist who brings to bear 15-plus years of civil litigation experience. He has consulted, advised, and conducted briefings for members of Congress, their staff, state legislators, and testified before multiple state legislative committees, and has spoken at press conferences and in briefings on Capitol Hill. As co-founder of SOCK, Stop Obamacare in Kansas initiative, Richard led efforts that resulted in Kansas returning $31.5 million of an Obamacare EIG grant. Richard serves as general counsel for Patriot Coalition, FIRE Coalition, the Citizens Constitutional Caucus, and revitalized the Second Amendment. He is also Dean of Justice Studies at the Sherman Institute. Well, welcome to our radio show.
Thank you, Hal. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, you and I kind of met. We've not met personally, but I would say we're friends, because we are warriors on this Article 5 convention issue. So let me and we've done a number of shows on that subject, and it's interesting that 20 or 25 years ago, I don't think too many people even gave it much of a second thought. It was something that we were battling, opposing, and a handful of other well-funded groups, but it was sort of a quiet battle. It wasn't making many headlines. The average person wouldn't even give it a second thought, and even a lot of state representatives didn't really know too much about it. But what got you involved in this?
Well, I'll tell you what, I actually got involved in this by a friend of mine, a fellow patriot, who was a John Butcher, still is a John Butcher. And he brought it to my attention, and I looked into it, and I said, you know, Paul, this really is a serious problem. We need to do something about it. And he and I joined forces. At that time, I had a active group. It's not quite so active now, called the November Patriots here in Kansas. and he became a member of the November Patriots as well. And we actually put on, I think it was in 2009 or 2010, we put on a seminar, if you will, for the Kansas legislatures and or legislators. Now, I think we had maybe 4 that showed. That was what the interest was in it, and that's what started me on this. I've been researching it and fighting against it since 2009, and since that time, I have spent hundreds, probably well over 1,000 hours in terms of writing articles, research, investigation, and traveling around speaking on this. I have debated, I think, every main leader of the constitutional rewriters groups except Mark Meckler. I've debated Ferris in Virginia, Dranius in Arizona, several of the Convention of States directors around the country. So we pretty much, I understand what their arguments are and the flaws in their arguments.
Well, let's just refute, or let's look at some of their positions that they articulate when they address state legislators, and we can refute some of these. The first one, of course, is we have an out-of-control federal government, and I think you and I would probably agree with that. We do agree with that. So we need to have an Article 5 convention to get this runaway government, federal government, back under control. So could you address that? The first one of the top ones they throw out.
Well, and there are a couple ways to address that. And part of the problem that we've had with the erosion of our liberty is the misuse of terms. And this is an example of that. I mean, for instance, the use of the word sovereignty has been bastardized by our courts. And our courts will refer to our governments as sovereign. Our governments are not sovereign. By definition, the United States government is not sovereign because it's a government of limited powers. Sovereign is a self-directed, self-regulating entity from whom or from within its political powers emanate. It is the source of all political power. Well, we know for the first time in the history of mankind, under the United States Republic, that power resides in the people. So, and the same thing is with this attitude about the federal government. They're right, but they don't know they're right, because number one, the federal government does not consist of the government in Washington. The federal government is actually the central government in Washington, D.C., the state governments, and we the people. So that's one of their first mistakes. I guess they are right. Federal government's out of control, but that includes the states. What they're basically telling us is that we don't need to worry about it. We can just kind of sit around. We, the people, can sit around, watch TV, and drink beer, and the states are going to bring the federal government under control. Well, again, the problem is the states are part of the federal government, and they're part of the federal government that's out of control. As you know, every state and federal officer in this country takes an oath under the federal Constitution to support and defend that Constitution. So state officers are, in essence, federal officers under that oath. So when the federal government, number one, offers money that it has no constitutional authority to offer, such as education, environmental protection, housing, roads, roads, the state governments violate their constitutional oath by accepting it. And they're more than happy to accept it. In fact, some of them, and I've heard them even in Kansas, but I've heard them elsewhere, they're on this big boondoggle because what they want to do is to keep and I heard a state legislator say this, what we need to do is figure out a way to keep the federal money and but lose the federal control. It's not going to happen. It's ridiculous. The states aren't going to rein in the federal government. That's like asking Frank James to watch Jesse James. It's just nonsense.
It's interesting, too, because our Mr. Mark Meckler, who's the founder of Convention of States, he is quoted, and anyone listening to the show, if you go to livingroomconversations.org, until they scrub it, I'm sure, until enough people start looking at it and asking him questions about his affiliation with this organization, this left-wing organization, but he's quoted as saying that elites in both Washington, D.C. and state capitals are running things.
Yes.
And of course, if that's the case, then why in the world would he support an Article 5 convention that will be where the elites from the states are supporting? In other words, you're going to have elites running the show. I mean, he's basically admitted this. But
well, exactly.
When he testifies at state legislators, he doesn't he mentions the federal elites, or at least the federal overreach. He doesn't mention the state elites. And there's another thing too. I try to ask him, on Facebook when I see these folks in person. They're a lot more nasty on Facebook. In person, they're not usually as nasty. But I'll ask them, who are these elites you claim are doing this? And they'll never tell you. They can't tell you because then they'll be called conspiracy theorists. So they talk about elites as somehow the minute you get in that 495 Beltway in D.C., your mind automatically cannot do what's right. You have to be a big government advocate. The minute you step out of that, you're back to being a good patriot. Guys like Tom Coburn, Have you debated Tom Coburn, by the way?
I have not. He and I bumped heads up here. He came up here to Kansas and testified in front of the Senate and the House. And one of the things and this gets into another point that we'll probably talk about, but one of the testimony I gave included the fact that it's the Billionaire Boys Club, including the Koch brothers and their Americans for Prosperity and those organizations that are supporting this. Well, he jumps up and says that the Americans for Prosperity was not a Koch organization. Koch had nothing to do with it. That, in fact, he and a couple other men started Americans for Prosperity in Oklahoma, which is an absolute total lie. And really? I actually supplemented my testimony. Of course, it doesn't matter because everybody's on board up here in Kansas. But I supplemented my testimony to prove that he was lying. In fact, I had an excerpt of a radio interview with one of the Koch brothers that said that he basically said that, my brother and I were so pleased at the results of establishing Americans for Prosperity. It's done more than we ever hoped.
Well, it's interesting, too, because on the left-wing side of this issue are groups like Wolfpack, and their big claim is to get big money out of politics. Well, big money will be in politics as long as it's politics. What they're trying to do is basically make it an unlevel playing field. They don't like Citizens United, but Larry Lessig, who was one of the principal activists, left-wing Harvard professor, he creates Mayday PAC, a super PAC to end all super PACs. So, and you look at big money, like you said, the Koch brothers. Now, I don't know if the Koch brothers have personally come out and endorsed an Article 5 convention. However, maybe I haven't seen that, some direct link. However, they support ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. I think Charles Koch belongs to the Aspen Institute, where Mark Meckler speaks. And again, I don't know. I can't see a direct link to that. Like here's some kind of direct link. I'll give you a big check if you support Article 5. I can't say that, but usually these big money people, they have people underneath them that make sure their money's put where they, the money's pretty, it's guarded pretty carefully. So they're not going to give. In fact, they're not going to give you guys $1 million. They're not going to give Camp Constitution $1 million. I know that. So.
Yeah, I mean, the connections are pretty clear if you start looking at them. Like, number one, go to the State Policy Institute, which is funded in part by Charles Koch Foundation. And if you do that, it's Charles Koch Foundation at Castle Rock, which is the Adolph Kurz family that primarily funds the State Policy Network. And it's what I call a hub organization. So other NGOs, non-governmental organizations, go there to coordinate their policies and their funding and all that stuff. And their members are the Heritage Foundation. It is funded by the Charles Koch Foundation, Castle Rock Foundation, and Adolph Kurz Foundation. You have Freedom Works. That's another one in there. They're the ones that are supplying Glenn Beck with millions of dollars, not personally, but supporting his programs. Another one is Cato Institute that is funded by David Koch and started by the Kochs, I guess. Independence Institute, that's where Professor Nettleson works, funded by the Koch and the Koch Foundation and the Castle Rock Foundation. Goldwater Institute, that's where Dranius used to work. Nick Dranius, a big supporter. It's funded by the Charles Koch Foundation, Walton Family Foundation. I mean, it just goes on, the connections. And organizations associated with Koch are the ones that they started in 2009, getting Rush Limbaugh, supporting him over $2,000 a year. They started giving Sean Hannity $1.3 million in 2008. Glenn Beck, that we've already mentioned, they started funding millions of dollars 2010. And, oh, my God, who's this? Mark Levine. They started giving him money in 2010. Yeah, why do you suppose all these people and all these organizations are supporting an Article 5, and all these individuals, Limbaugh and Hannity and Beck and Levine, are supporting Article 5? Why do you suppose they're doing that?
It's interesting, too, because there are so many issues that these, I refer to them as corporate media neocons, that they won't touch. They won't, very seldom will they mention Common Core, Agenda 21. They might talk about global warming. Oh, it's a lot of nonsense, but they don't really get to the core of the issue. They refuse to. And if you ever called in and said, hey, you're right about that it goes back to Agenda 21, they'll shut you off. So it's almost as if and what's interesting is that there are so many good patriots. They're talk show junkies, and they think that all the action, they're responsible for is listening to talk radio, voting Republican, and buying their books their ghostwritten books every other month that they come out at $35 a pop. That somehow is how you redefine a patriot activist. So, but I do have to say that, and I've been involved in this issue, Article 5, since 1988. 88. And I've never seen, I have to say, they're well organized, they're well funded. I mean, you give me $1 million a year to fight this, or $5 million. Convention of States has $5 million, almost $5 million a year for this one issue only. If I had and you give me unlimited access to neocon media, and believe me, I'd have 1,000 people at every hearing on these issues.
Yeah. Well, and here's something else that people don't know, and this really, the state legislators are violating their duty of due diligence, or fiduciary duty of due diligence, because they don't even investigate who's behind the movement in history. And there have been 2 campaigns, the Article 5 campaigns in our history. And the first one was between 1890 and 1945, which is called the First Progressive Era. And the second one started in 1963. And is going on today. And what happened in 1963 was the Ford Foundation spent what is equivalent in today's money, $0.5 to $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion, to set up and fund the Foundation for the Republic, which rewrote the Constitution and
was
then
it
started.
Was it Fund for the Republic? I think that's what they call it.
Fund for the Republic. And they actually set up a sub-organization headed by Rex Tugwell, which was FDR's head of FDR's New Deal program, and they wrote this new Constitution, and then they brought it out in a book in 1974, I want to say, and then in 75 we get this exponential surge in Article 5 requests, which is another marker, if you will, for the First Progressive Era. Starting in 1893, up to that point, they had about 1/4 of an application per year for the first 100 years of our country. Yeah. And starting after that, then they surged over to 3 per year, which is an exponential increase. And then what happened starting in 1975, which is the year after the book came out, the application surged to over 7 per year, another exponential increase. And at that time, they had, for instance, the Vice President Rockefeller, Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, was promoting this damn thing, and we know that it was the Tugwell Constitution that they were promoting. In fact, we can trace it up through the 1980s, because that's when there was some letter exchanges between Phyllis Schlafly and Chief Justice Warren Burger, who had retired. That's right. He had retired and joined the Centennial Committee for the Constitution. The
Bicentennial Commission, I think it was called.
Yeah, the Bicentennial. I'm getting old and forgetful, Hal. I'm sorry.
Well, it was interesting because I think the Bicentennial Commission, there was a thing called Project 87, And this is of course 200th anniversary, and I think he was a member of that, but he was one of the few that came out against these proposed changes through an Article 5 convention. And there's a book you've probably seen or read called The Power to Lead by James McGregor Burns, who was a Democrat operative. He just recently passed away in his 90s. But he said in his book, and this is what led many people in the early 80s to start coming out against it, because it was now being pushed by this wasn't some grassroots movement trying to get big government out of our lives, but it was a grassroots, it was a power play by the insiders. And McGregor Burns said that the founders, our founding fathers, were too smart for us. We have to make right what they put asunder. He meant by limited government and checks and balances.
Yeah.
And he's advocating a parliamentary system is pretty much what he was promoting.
Yeah, I mean, and it's always been that way. In fact, the point that I was making, though, is that in one of his letters, he says that he tells Phyllis Shapley, he says, some professors have showed me a proposed constitution, and I don't really understand it exactly, but it apparently would do away with the states and set up federal districts. Well, when he's referring to the professors, what he's talking about is the organization that Rex Tugwell set up to rewrite the Constitution. Because what he did is he went out with his $1 billion and he bought about 100 professors from these elitist colleges and universities to do it. And that's the professors that Chief Justice Warren Burger was referring to, was the Tugwell the Tugwell professors. So we know that the Rockefellers and those folks, the Ford Foundation that were supporting this, they were active at least up until the late 80s promoting this. And I say they're still active in it, but they've gone underground. They've now set up new NGOs like the Convention of States projects that do this specifically. In fact, I kind of suspect to some degree that ALEC was set up to promote this. This was one of their initial agenda items from the beginning. Of course, they supported an Article 5 for decades.
Well, it's interesting. Like, there's some organizations like ALEC, and mostly they attract conservative Republican types. And like a lot of organizations, they do a lot of good so they can get away with doing a little bad. And it's the bad that's it's going to kill you. So they have to have legitimacy. It's like William Buckley. William Buckley is supposed to be this one of the godfather of the new conservatives, and you'd read some of his columns and say, he's pretty right on this one, but he was really one of the patron demons of the neocon movement, and he redefined conservatism. Yeah. And people who were the true liberty-minded people were considered relegated to, and Buckley would excommunicate certain. This is not respectable conservatism. You America the Firsters, you people who don't want, who want us to get outside the UN, you people who believe in the Constitution as it was meant to be. These were all people that he's little by little people, organizations like the John Birch Society, people like Joe Sober and Pat Buchanan. He was the liberals' favorite conservative. And here he goes on public radio, tax-supported public radio. And who does he interview? Doesn't interview people like us. He interviews his fellow progressives, socialists. And he'd debate. Yes, so as we're losing our liberties, he's winning a debate. Well, debating is great, but I'd rather lose a debate and win the battle than win a debate and lose the battle.
Yeah. I think you're right, and it's been going on for forever. This isn't anything new.
What have you been up to? Now here we are. We're actually taping this a day before a broadcast. And by the way, tomorrow is a very big day for us who live in Greater Boston. It's Lexington, the Battle of Lexington. We do the reenactment. I'll be up there at 4:30 in the morning with some friends and family members. Videotaping the Lexington reenactment and perhaps the Concord reenactment, and it's a great time for a patriot. But what have you been doing the last month or so? What developments in this battle? Where can you update some of the listeners?
Yeah, there really hasn't been that much going on in Kansas. The Kansas one did not pass here. They've been promoting it for like 2 years. In fact, I stopped it last year because I had requested a Open Meetings Act request on them, and the legislature didn't give me notice of their meeting. So I filed a complaint, and they agreed with the county attorney there in Shawnee not to go forward with it. But then they tried to push it again this year, and it actually got hung up because the House has a rule that on an Article 5 they have to do a 2/3 vote, and they couldn't make the 2/3 vote.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what they'll end up doing is they'll suspend the rules, or they'll change that rule for next year and come at it again. That's no doubt what they'll do.
Well, New Hampshire. I covered New England and New York, and of course I have been helping people back in. I remember going into the Virginia Assembly in 2000. The goal was to introduce a resolution to repeal their old calls. And we got pretty much people, what's this? What's this? What is this? We have no idea what this is. But it took a long time, and I think Virginia repealed all of their calls and have been successfully fighting any new calls. But Thursday in New Hampshire, there's an executive session with the House committee where we hope to kill two con calls, the Wolfpack and the Convention of States. We had hearings last week, and then about a month ago in the Senate. It was interesting, too. One of the arguments that these people use who support one, they'll say that, well, we have Republican majorities in, 34 or so states, so there's no way we would ever get any kind of unreasonable amendments or crazy amendments would never pass because, well, we demonstrated that that's not true because the New Hampshire House and Senate are controlled by Republicans, and last year, 75 Republicans, along with about 100 Democrats, voted for the Wolfpack resolution.
Yeah,
it died in the Senate by a pretty partisan margin. But this year, 22 out of 24 voted in favor in the Senate, voted in favor of the Wolfpack resolution, and 12 out of 14 Republicans. So it's kind of interesting how these Republicans, conservatives, would vote for this left-wing Article 5 convention. So Republicans will indeed vote the wrong way. So that's no safeguard. Even if the convention was held tomorrow.
That's something that most of us understand, that there's not a nickel's worth of difference between Republicans and Democrats, and they're both controlled by the same special interest, basically. So conservative doesn't mean what it used to mean, and
that's correct. It's been redefined.
Yeah,
we have about a minute left, so why don't you, a minute and a half? Where can people get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more about this through you? I know there's an organization. You're at the Patriot Coalition, so let us just give us a website or a phone number.
Yeah, Richard at thepatriotcoalition.com, or my phone number if they want to call me, 816-853-8718. They can get a hold of me there, and I do have a Facebook page.
And what about the Patriot Coalition? Is there a website for that?
There is. It's patriotcoalition.com.
And you have a lot of good information. You've got video clips. Some of your debates, too, I hope, are available there.
They are. You go to the Patriot Coalition, our YouTube site. I think it's youtube.com/Patriot Coalition, and that can get you to the videos. Or you can go to the patriotcoalition.com webpage, and then that will have links to the debates and the presentations that we've done. Yeah.
All right. So, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for being a guest. Hopefully, God willing, we'll meet in person sometime in the near future. God bless, and
thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff, that airs on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time.